Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third edition of Staging National Objection webinars. I want to remind all participants that this meeting will be recorded and you can watch it later on our YouTube channel. As Ertuğ introduced, my name is Şeyda Nur Yıldırım, and I'm a researcher here at the ERC-funded project titled Staging National Objection, Theater and Politics in Turkey and its Diasporas. It is my pleasure to be the moderator of the first book talk that ERC webinars organized this year and introduce our distinguished speaker, Dr. Sertaç Sehlikoğlu. Here at Staging National Objection, we are grateful to our kind host, Kadir Has University, and the European Commission for their generous support. And of course, we would also like to thank Dr. Sertaç Sehlikoğlu for accepting our invitation. First, Dr. Sehlikoğlu will present her 2020 book, Working Out Desire, Women, Sport, and Self-Making in Istanbul. Then we will open this webinar for questions from the audience. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started. If you would like to be notified of Staging National Objections future events, you can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, or leave your email address using the chat function on Zoom. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our amazing speaker, Dr. Sehlikoğlu. Dr. Sehlikoğlu is a social anthropologist specialized in gender and subjectivity in the Middle East and Islamicate contexts. Her work often focuses on intangible aspects of human subjectivity that enable humans to change and transform social life. She has studied in Istanbul, Montreal, Toronto, and Cambridge before completing a research fellowship at Pembroke College, Cambridge. Dr. Sehlikoğlu is the editor of the book, The Everyday Makings of Heteronormativity, Cross-Cultural Explorations of Sex, Gender, and Sexuality, the editor of 3 special issues, Everyday Intimacies of the Middle East, Why Revisit Intimacy, and Field Sites, Field Notes on Sports, and the author of 2 books, Kişilik Özelliklerine Göre Çocuk Eğitimi, and Working Out Desire, Women, Sport, and Self-Making in Istanbul, as well as several articles. She is currently leading an ERC project titled Imaginative Landscapes of Islamist Politics Across the Balkan to Bengal Complex, Tahayyül, on Imagination and Politics as Senior Research Associate at the Institute of Global Prosperity at University College London. Dr. Sehlikoğlu, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Ertuğ. Thank you, Jale, for honoring me with this book launch at my new home. I recently joined the UCL, obviously. And thank you, Şeyda, for your introduction and sharing this event. I'm deeply humbled by both the invitation and the interest, I think, amongst the audience. While I'm trying to share my screen, okay, it always takes a little. Okay, I think it's on now, right? No, wait. It should be on now. Is it? Okay, cool. Yes, I'm a social anthropologist, and yes, I enjoy actually carrying like 2 main tasks in my scholarship. And my first interest is to focus on intangible aspects of human subjectivity, right? Like this subjectivity connects the individuals at deeper and less visible ways to the society, to each other. And for this aim, I have worked on intangible things like desire, aspirations, agency, self-making. And then secondly, I also enjoy ethnographically revisiting the concepts that are used in theory too much, to the extent of, us not being sure about the exact definition of them. So I like going back to the field, using ethnographic material, and try to see the more grounded versions and readings of these concepts. And I have used intimacy for this, and agency was again part of the scholarship, and my new work on imagination is also trying to accomplish that. So I start my every book talk by underlying that Working Out Desire is an ethnographic. I have the book, by the way, although my screen is probably very small right now. Just wanted to hold it. because when you publish it, it feels good to hold it. That it's an ethnographic account of women's desires. And I need you to stop and think about how can a researcher study desire ethnographically, right? Desire is not like kinship. It's not like ritual or any of the topics that anthropologists traditionally study. Neither desire is a very tangible reference, right? On the contrary, there are two main challenges in studying something so intangible like desire. First challenge is, as I said, its intangibility. And the second one is its relativity. That desire is a product of social and historical as well as economical processes. And thus, who can desire what and how is very culturally and temporally specific. So studying desire ethnographically, therefore, is quite a challenge. So what I needed to do was to find, to turn this task, studying desire ethnographically, to turn this task into a methodologically meaningful process. And I did this by tracing desire through one of its objects, through an object of desire, right? And my object of desire, as you can see on the screen as a first point, bullet point, was spor merakı. It's an urban trend, and spor merakı literally means interest or curiosity in sport, which enjoys a wide following among 1.5 million women in Istanbul. And also, when I'm speaking to a Western audience, right, I need to clarify one thing, that spor merakı is not like exercise trend or exercise craze in the Western sense, as used in English. Neither is it descriptive, nor unlike how men refer to exercise as doing sports, lifting weights, having a match, running. Right? In my work, I look at the ways in which Istanbulite women use spor merakı as a tool to manifest their desiring selves. And as women do with many other objects of desire, in the case of exercise, they often undersell their yearnings and aspirations, presenting the latter as simply interests or innocuous curiosities. And to appreciate the distinctiveness of Istanbulite women's spor merakı, like many anthropologists do, I follow women's own words and use their language as a gateway to their imaginations. So I want to kind of lay this down. And also, of course, we need to say one more thing, that for something to be turned into an object of desire, it must have some sort of significance in that particular context. And in Turkey, sports was providing a perfect lens. Why? Sports has been used by the Republican Turkey as a tool for transformation from the 1930s and onwards. Beginning from 1930s, the Republican Nationalist Project of Turkey has promoted exercise to create a new, healthy, and civilized bodies. They have implemented compulsory physical education classes and initiated youth and sport festivals. So like these photos you see are from various years of those festivals. State-forced investments have marked women's involvement in sports as an elite activity on the one hand. On the other hand, simultaneously, it had a double-edged sword effect relationship with the normative femininity. Bodily movements associated with sports and exercise, such as running or jumping, are considered juvenile, therefore a threat to ideal femininity. The same movements were also objects of sexual control and sexual harassment. Of course, the contrast between expectations of the state and of the social norms, both heavily gendered, had created a tension over the same gendered bodies. As a result of this tension, even after Turkey's decades-long investments, what we were seeing in the 1980s, 50 years later, was that there was a public resistance when it comes to women's and girls' participation in sports. The compulsory physical education classes in high schools had been famously opted out by girls with the help of fake medical reports. We all have heard them, probably, if we are not immediately familiar with them. And the gymnastic performances of the annual Youth and Sports Fest celebrations, where girls and boys paraded in shorts, have always been a matter of public anxiety. So needless to explain, the fourth photo on the left bottom is after 2000. You know what that signifies politically, and therefore they are no longer wearing shorts, which was also discussed heavily. So Istanbulite women's spor merakı does not reflect the Republicanist ideology, however. Neither it does reflect an immediate fit to the normative expectations. By the time I started my research, the middle-aged Istanbulite women who went walking in the parks had already become city legends, known as sporcu teyzeler, sporty aunties. And I do start my book with an eulogy to them. While the outdoor gyms replacing playgrounds in public parks were strange to the majority of Istanbulites, they were nevertheless swiftly discovered by middle-aged women, often wearing long robes and large headscarves. The contrast between the unfit, joyful, ordinary, and often covered bodies of Istanbul's sporty aunties and the fit, disciplined, serious, less covered, and elite bodies of Istanbul's elite bodies of early Republican sportswomen form the heart of my research interest. Oops, sorry, I did something. These contrasts, and I will play this, maybe without the sound. These contrasts present one of the few occasions where the veil drawn over women's agentive desires become relatively more transparent and can be captured ethnographically speaking. And I tried to study this multi-layered and admittedly very colorful desiring selves of Istanbulite women in my book. The book then connects a diverse body of women to one another as a collective object of desire. What does this connection tell us about the formations of an object of desire? I then study the connections amongst women according to a three-angle approach, through gendered self, through space, which is often Istanbul, but there are other elements of space, and through the perspectives of time, temporalities. These three-angled approach also determines the organization of the book, as it is divided, that you can see here in the contents page, as self, space, and time. And each one of them had their own 3 chapters, dividing those elements of self into 3, elements of space into 3, and elements of time into 3. So I think I like the number 3, but it also made sense after years of revision. I also want to highlight the last part, the part on time and temporality. In this part, I explain how women had to regulate their time, and then through regulating their time, instead of letting the imposed, letting the sense of imposed time, so the time regimes are often operating on individuals at different levels. And most of the women I have interviewed had a particular time regime they have to follow. But through the leisure time, they have a chance to kind of temporarily open up some space, right? So which was bringing in another kind of conversation to the way we imagine process of autonomy and liberation. This part was one of the most painful, suffering, but simultaneously enjoyable parts in the book that I have written. Anyway, So taking a feminist approach, what I do is I refuse to simply see Istanbulite women as mindless followers of a neoliberal trend. Rather, I develop a multi-layered analysis on how women use spor merakı to manifest the desiring self that takes them out of domestic zone, physically, emotionally, temporally, right? This project and the extensive fieldwork have allowed me to develop a new approach vis-a-vis a number of classic and contemporary themes, the anthropology of the Middle East. It has led me to formulate desiring self-making. I use the concept of desire as a way to gloss a wide range of aspirations, needs, and longings. Desire in the book is beyond the moment that it is felt, experienced, or even yearned for. It is formed through, as I explained, through this one little example of Turkish Republican history and their investment in sports, and how it has somehow created a sense of reference when any individual wants to create a change in their life, right? When sports becomes one of the things they start with. Sport has always been marked as a signifier of change, transformation, self-improvement. So I formulate desire as a human capacity to seek new possibilities and the ability to dream and fantasize, all of which are not only aspects of subjectivity, but also deeply rooted in human agency. It is this agentive capacity of desiring selves that enables women to transform the meanings and categories that limit their bodies physically, temporally, and spatially towards the formation of a collective trend. Spor merakı is the product of their ability to act against multiple and often opposing norms. And I would like to open this opposing norms aspect with questions if possible, actually. But by not challenging them directly, right? That's important. Rather, they do this by fooling and emptying them, which makes us think about how this contrasts with the sense of resistance, right? So in contrast to resistance, this agency is purposefully unthreatening and thus often divergent, left unenunciated. And of course, because of those elements, this type of agency often escapes from the ethnographic gaze and from the anthropological inquiry. I would like to highlight one important thing before I finish my short presentation to my work. This is what I find to be a thought-provoking painting of Layla Shawa, a Gaza-born Palestinian artist. And I think it visually describes how we often imagine the combination of desire and Muslim women as if they are somehow incompatible. That Islam brings veil to women and desire. That Islam brings a veil to women, and desire is always to be seized and consumed, or it melts away, like it is in this picture, right? And I like using this image simply because what happens when you're writing a dissertation, trying to turn it into a publication, is you present various parts of it in so many different conferences, panels, to various audiences, right? And every time I do a presentation, there would be at least one soul, if not the first one, that would be asking me to open up the Muslimhood of my interlocutors. Like, tell us more about their religious significance, which will make them so different from us. I sometimes received questions on how everything I described about women's homosexuality and heterosexuality is actually very similar to what they have been seeing in Netherlands, and that what I see in Turkish had to be drastically different. Or I remember one particular question that was very interesting. I was doing a presentation about changing rooms and how women are bringing normative gaze through female gaze when they were monitoring each other and each other's bodies. And in other words, I was giving a presentation about a space right? The entire the ethnography I was presenting was taking place in a space where women are changing. They are taking off their bras, putting on clothes, etc. And the very first question I received was asking me to define veil, or asking me how to, like, how do they wear hijab or something, headscarf, right? So there is a tendency to signify subjects, individuals who happen to be Muslims only through Islam. And then bringing in design, this conversation was ungrammatical to the large number of audience, right? And therefore this image is quite striking to me. I want to I think I should wrap up by saying how the book is not an ethnographic, which should be clear by now, I guess, ethnographic account of women exercising across Istanbul, right? Rather, it's an ethnographic account of the formation of desiring subjectivities, the human capacity to desire that is not only formed and shaped by socio-historical constraints, but also marked in its agentive aptitude. Desiring subjectivity is rooted in aspirations, fantasy, anticipation within and beyond the realms of sex and sexuality. Tracing a form of subjectivity with such extensive operations is possible by focusing on a single objective desire through which women, as I said, manifest their desiring subjectivity. So I will stop here. I have already highlighted a couple of points I was hoping to open up with the questions, but I'm all yours.
Many thanks, Dr. Sehlikoğlu, for this thought-provoking presentation. I now want to open the webinar for questions from our audience, and please leave your questions to the chat so that we can answer, Dr. Sehlikoğlu can answer them one by one. And I want to ask the first question using my privileges as a moderator. I have to say that reading your book and listening to you today made me think about my own experience with sporty aunties, considering that my mother has now becoming a sporty auntie herself in her own way. In this last 2 months, actually. My question will be about the current pandemic situation and how the collectivity has changed in a virtual environment and so on. So I know that there has to be a transformation since COVID changed everything, and including spor merakı maybe. And I assume that I also know that there are some kind of WhatsApp motivation groups, women gathering together to share the photographs of their meals and the daily step trackers in their phones, and sharing the stories of weight loss and their emotions. So my question will be, how do you evaluate the current pandemic's impact on this highly collective and physical shared interest, namely spor merakı, and how do you think that the alternative to doing exercise in a shared environment would affect the self-making processes that you emphasize in your book?
So obviously, the research took place in 2011, 2012. That was before anybody was even able to imagine a pandemic and such long durée of lockdown and isolation. I want to start with something else. I want to start with the fact that my mom is a sporty auntie herself as well, although I didn't have a chance to interview with her. It's never a good idea, so I never did that. But it's kind of there is something going on, right? It's very close to home. That's what I'm trying to say, I guess. But what I should probably clarify is what are the elements of, like, what is the significance of sociality in this process of desiring self-making, right? So space was so central that in one of the chapters I explain how women are actually using this woman on the space for multiple reasons. So one of the reasons is to be out of that kind of environment where the environment is always imposing them certain roles, and they need to, so itself is operating in a particular way. When you're constantly expected to behave in a particular way, right? If your only like space of socialization is your campus, then that might make you a very good academic, maybe like very good academic as in very consumed in your sense of academic. But then what would you do if you want to discover other parts of yourself? Right? You need to open up some space, and that space is both in terms of physical space but also temporal space. So women are using gyms for this, and that's quite important. So most of the women I had interviewed, and then later on I stayed in touch with them, as you said, social media, not on WhatsApp. There wasn't really, maybe there was, but my interlocutors, most of them didn't have WhatsApp back then, but over Facebook, etc. That also, I think, reflects the age group. That I later on watched, like there was this one particular woman, I talk about her in my book as Nur. She later on, I think she only had a secondary school degree or something. She like being able to get out of her house was giving her the mental, spatial, temporal space so that she can focus on really discovering what she wants from life. What she wanted was to finish university. Now she's student in 2 universities, but for this she had to finish high school first, right? So I'm not trying to turn this into a liberation story, but what I'm trying to say is, like, we need to understand how patriarchal ideologies operate. There's not one single patriarchal ideology. We have a tendency to think about patriarchy as if it's one single thing. That's not how I think it works. Like the culture of aesthetics impose one type of patriarchal ideology, and then that expects you to be skinny, right? And then there's family, and depending on your family role, most of the women are expected to become mothers and procreate as many kids as possible. So that's another role, but also some wife duties they have. And there's also like religion is one patriarchal ideology, nation, Kemalism, all of them are imposing very contrasting, often patriarchal ideologies on women. So they have to navigate through them, but to be able to find the right spots so that they can get out of it and try to discover what they really want. That's a very challenging process, right? And that area is providing this. Sometimes that area is not an indoor gym, but a park, right? A public park. We do know how women are taking over some of the parks, especially on certain hours of the day. And in the parks I was going to, they were taking over from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., roughly speaking. And so women. There's also another element in your question that I feel, I don't want to give too long answers, but sometimes questions are too broad. You have to bring out the interconnectivities. That is, so the way sociality works is quite important in understanding what it means to be part of a trend, right? So spor merakı, if we are lazy enough, we look at it, oh, in Turkey, there's this Western exercise trend, that's what's happening in local tones, whatever, move on. No, that's not what's happening. So one of the things that I did to really understand whether what's going on is an American European trend coming to Turkey, and all of a sudden women are becoming some sort of mindless followers of this trend. Right? One of the things I did to evaluate, ethnographically evaluate this assumption was to go and do interviews with all these TV celebrities who are carrying this neoliberal trend to women's lives. So I interviewed with, so there was Doktorum back then, right? I interviewed Aytu Kolankaya, Zahide Yetiş, and Feridun Kunak. He was at Channel 7, Dr. Civanım, something like this. And I interviewed with Ebru Şallı, who's a Pilates guru now, obviously. And all women were telling me about kind of who's beautiful. I kept asking, who do you think is beautiful on TV? And they kept saying Sabah Tümer. And so I interviewed with her as well. And one of the things I kind of I didn't get any details except with Ebru Şallı. I didn't get much details in all of them. But one of the things that became very clear to me after carrying those interviews with such celebrities was something that we have been missing, right? That those celebrities cultivate themselves in order to become role models, in order to become popular. And the only way for them to do this is to stay tuned into what women desire. Okay, so what do women want to see when they look at Doktorum TV channel? Why is it not gaining enough popularity among certain class as opposed to Dr. Civan'ım is doing? And what can they do to compensate this? And how did Ebru Şallı herself has decided to focus further on Pilates? What were the markers? And why did she have so many pregnancy Pilates videos, right? So all of these were telling us that women were not necessarily mindless followers of a trend. They were shaping that trend. So, and that's one element of their agentive element. The second one is how they were going to the gyms, right, to actually test whether what they see on TV is true or not. So for this, they needed the women on the gym. They need to go into a space where 70 women are working out, right? Ask each other for how long have you been coming here? How many kilos have you lost? Not to compete against other women. That was my misunderstanding at the beginning. I was deadly wrong. They ask these two questions to each other because they want to make sure that losing, I don't know, 10 kilos in a month is impossible. And it's a lie, you know, broadcasted on TV, and they need to test this lie, you know, how this is a lie by seeing actual women. So all of these are kind of different layers of, as I said, you asked a very broad question. Probably you didn't expect me to kind of get into this Pandora's box, but all of these are related to the importance of space. Right now, they might be, women are trying to probably maintain certain elements of these needs, but we need to understand the needs so that we can understand what elements are carried into the social media, right? So I'll stop here.
Thank you for this wonderful answer. I have one question in the chat, but if you have any question and you want to raise your hand, it's okay too. So you can raise your hand and unmute yourself. But I will be asking Gamze's question first. So she's asking, Dr. Sehlikoğlu mentioned the processes of autonomy and liberation. How should we understand the concept of self-making and self-making projects? Does this concept always signify a sort of achievement or gaining agency? Are there failures of self-making projects?
I think that's a good question. Thank you. That's a really good question. Actually, self-making is a very anthropological term. It's related to the theories of subjectivity. And the theories of subjectivity is important because it helps us to go beyond the theories of identity. So I'll kind of give you this very, very short background to what it means to go beyond the theories of identity. Right? So like the example I have provided earlier, like so many individuals look at one single person, right? And depending on what they think is what they think this individual's identity is, Muslim, Black, brown, woman, etc. They centralize this identity understanding of this individual. But individuals are not, you know, just one single, they don't have one single layer, right? So the same individual would be taking multiple subject positionings in a day. The same individual would be, I don't know, a teacher during certain hours of the day, and then maybe a daughter when she's talking to her father. She would also be a student, like a kind of good citizen. Like there would be these multiple subject positionings. So we bring in theory of subjectivity to reflect that multiplicity. That's number one, theories of Self-making, however, does not have to necessarily entail a designed project. So when I say self-making, I don't mean like in management, that's a kind of different term. In anthropology, it's not necessarily like I want to become a celebrity, I want to become a Pilates guru, and it's kind of your ideal and you establish your goals and you progress towards there and then you fail or succeed. It's not like that. It's more like you analyze this over a period of time, right? So over a period of time, the sense of self you have developed would have taken a shape, but then later on that shape will change. So, but in my book, the reason I specifically use self-making is because I'm actually using desiring self-making. That's what I'm trying to understand, right? And it is quite essential to understand that, I argue, because there is something heavily gendered about desire that seems to keep escaping from our attention, right? So we all know these kind of childbearing practices in Turkey, how, you know, if there's a boy, he needs to be indulged. If there's a girl, she needs to be taught how to control herself. Like one type of desire is always kind of cultivated through discipline, and another type of desire is always cultivated through kind of almost constant nourishing. It's almost as if you have to like the male desire has to be constantly nourished, because if you deprive him of their desires at any moment, then you would be taking away something very essential, something very central from his sense of self, right? Like the male desire needs to continuously desire, and female desire needs to continuously discipline herself. So the way this was reflected on my interlocutors, and also one more thing, a large number of my interlocutors were, back then I was in my 30s, were around my age, but I had also interviewed with women over 50s, right? So some of the things I'm going to say is much more prevalent amongst women over their 40s, right? Like they shy away from their desires so much that they don't even say what dish they like the most, right? If they're cooking, I don't know, mantı that evening, right? They don't say it's because, you know, I craved for it, canım çekti. They don't say that. They're like, my husband likes it, right? There is something about, you know, shying away from not only expressing, enunciating their desires, but also almost like being slightly ashamed of that. So my question is, how do these same individuals establish their desiring selves, right? So they have to connect with that. So my project then therefore mostly about this process. So which is why it doesn't have an element of success or failure, because if we look from the perspective of overall anthropology theories, there's no failure of self-making. That's another type of self that is made, right? But what I'm trying to look at here also is a contribution to the large literature of anthropology of the Middle East and anthropology of Islam and anthropology of subjectivity, right? There is huge literature on ethical self-making, pious self-making, etc., etc. And I'm like, but there's also fun self and making of it. There's also desiring self and the making of it. So it was also a way of intervention, in other words.
Thank you, Sertaç Hocam. And the next question is coming from Deniz. Thank you, Dr. Sehlikoğlu, for this wonderful work that almost takes one into the gym and in these pandemic days. In your research and your participation in female-only gyms, did you ever get the inkling that these homosocial spaces hold certain queer potentialities?
Well, I have observed other things first before the queer kind of queer feeling. So there's, when women are just by themselves, right? There is a really one way of fun way of them speaking about sex, right? And that's very dirty. That's unimaginably dirty. I don't know what I'm talking about. That's so funny. And And that kind of like the way women talk about sex, like you can watch younger women blushing when they hear those kind of women who have been married for 20 years or so, maybe longer. But there's also the kind of like a Turkish culture doesn't have much personal space anyway, right? And those boundaries are completely lifted. So like I remember having to stop a woman who was trying to grab my back, and I know it's in recording, but I think it's scholarly significant as well, because she was like very curious about how I might have lost weight, and she remembers how my back looked and the first months of my membership to the gym, which was the start of my fieldwork. And you have to also understand, I spent almost a year in the gyms trying to kind of participant observation, and therefore I was exercising all the time. So it was just, you know, normal to lose a lot of weight. So there are other ways of how these normative boundaries were becoming porous, right? And I want to kind of, I enjoyed very much using the example of one particular woman. She was coming from a Balkan background. So in the area that I was doing field work, well, one of my field works, there were so many Balkan immigrants, right, Magyars. And she was also, therefore, like most of these individuals also see themselves as more European and therefore more progressive, etc., etc. And she was the only one who was taking proper shower in the changing room of that gym. So you need to understand this is taking place in one of the municipality-owned gyms. So everybody is living in walking distance, and it's much more preferable to take shower at home, in the comfort of home. But more importantly, not very many women were working so hard to get sweaty and feel a need to take a shower before they leave. So this woman was an exception. Another exception she had was she was really kind of fit for her age. She was in her 40s back then. And she was also drinking lots of green tea. So she became another object of desire, right? Well, I called her position as a mediator to women's desire, actually, which is also how I refer to all these celebrities, right? To also bring out the agentive element in this process. So her body was a source of fascination for every woman, and everybody was trying to see every corner of her body too. Another point where these boundaries were becoming porous. So yeah, I think it's quite important to understand how this homosociality like actually lifts the normative boundaries that we are used to, where we should also be open to understanding how lifting those boundaries, even in a short term, does not have to completely free individuals from normative boundaries, right? That's another element that I discuss. So one of the things I kind of have observed is that just because women are freed from male control in a space doesn't mean they're freed from patriarchal normative references, right? They carry those references over here. So then another complexity is brought into the conversation, which is how norms operate in a homosocial space in another way. That's kind of, they don't operate in the way that we are used to observing outside, right? In a more intimate level. Yeah, I kind of, I hope I provided a colorful answer. Women were colorful, by the way. I'm really missing that field work.
Thank you, Sertaç Hocam. There is another question from Bushra. What were women's experiences with their bodies and hijab related to being seen by others when they are doing exercise?
Thank you. Can I actually expand this question a little bit, Bushra? I can't see your face, nodding. Okay, wait, let me see your, I can't see you, but I hope you are nodding. Are you? Okay. I want to expand this a little bit, because actually it's very kind of one of the central elements of my scholarship, that I have studied norms and heteronormativity quite extensively, right? And that's all because I started my research from women-only gyms, and it's all like the main reason I started my research from women-only gyms was because their number was blooming unbelievably, 20-fold in like 7-8 years, crazy rate, right? I mean, when you think about Turkish society, percentage-wise, according to the official numbers of some of the research institutes, only half of the female population is wearing some form of headscarf. We can't know if it's from piety, if it's from modesty, if it's from whatever reasons, but only half. But a huge majority, about 80% of women, prefer to go to a women-only gym, right? So that's telling us something else. We all know that kind of there is an element of headscarf that's kind of very, very religiosity and even spirituality related. We all know there is something about family, and we all know right now there's another type of politics operating around headscarf. So there are multiple reasons. But when it comes to a particular type of modesty, right? Modesty is an interesting term. We shouldn't like say that word and end the conversation there. There should be something more. And one of the things I have really enjoyed doing was to talk to various women about why they choose a woman on the space, right? I also need to give one more kind of percentage, perhaps. In almost all of the gyms I went to, except with Yeşilvade. Yeşilvade has particular location, particular space. There's Islamic bourgeoisie, etc., if you are following. Except with Yeşilvade, in all other gyms, I went to BFITs, I went to municipality-owned ones. I think maximum 60% of women were wearing headscarf. And when you consider only half of the population, female population in Turkey is wearing headscarf, that's not drastically high, right? That means that a kind of large majority of the women preferring women on the gyms are not really wearing hijab, or it's again 50-50. I think combining the BFITs, it's actually 60-40 or something. Okay, so what does it tell us? What it tells us became clearer with the interviews. So in my interviews, women were telling me, women were not wearing hijab. So I'm going to give you some examples from women who are not wearing hijab, because with the women who are wearing hijab, I was wearing hijab back then myself. So I'm asking them, why do you choose women on the gym? And they're like, doesn't she know? Like there's this long pause, right? I did get good information from them as well, but it was much more informative to talk to non-headscarf wearing women, right? Because they would give you really good details about how, if or when there is a male present or male trainer in the room, they would refrain from jumping up and down, because their breasts would be jumping up and down, right? Or raising their legs unless they put the bottom of their pants into their socks, right? Or raising their arms if their t-shirt will reveal their tummies, right? So they would be giving me all these details. So there is something more about the way women feel a need to control their sexual bodies and its visibility, right? And that is actually, as I said, I really enjoyed studying and writing these parts. One of the women was telling me, and this is again a non-headscarf wearing woman, that she wouldn't want to do bedroom movements in presence of a man. She's talking about all the leg movements, obviously, right? And that was very informative, because actually that helped me to develop a scholarship on the institution of intimacy, which is Laurent Berlant's term, as culture of mahremiyet, right? So the institution of intimacy in Laurent Berlant's terminology, who is a very famous queer scholar, is about how, although it's the intimate space that's heteronormative, it gains intelligibility through the public, right? So in that public space, women were controlling their borders, establishing those borders at multiple levels repetitively, so that they wouldn't be penetrated by male gaze. Another element in the culture of mahremiyet, which was the gaze, how gaze is formed, how gaze is imagined, how gaze gains a sexual value, right? It's a sexual script is the term I use, another term from sexuality studies. So in that area, the very reason why female bodies are the mahrem bodies that needs to be covered, and if it's a scene, they feel penetrated, that's the sense of violation they feel, right, is because of all these entire dynamics of kind of passive, active, male-female dynamics. And through the gaze, that's very important in the context of Turkey and several parts of the Middle East and Eastern Mediterranean, because gaze is not imagined as something intangible at all. Think about it. It can touch. When nazar touches you, gaze touches you, it brings misfortune. And as much as it can touch and bring misfortune, it can also penetrate the borders that you are expected to cover, to preserve, right? So like I see the entire operation not as something that's only operating on women wearing or not wearing hijab. No, it's operating on female bodies in a very aggressive manner, and therefore it was as I said, like these exercise movements women do. It makes those boundaries normatively established really difficult to maintain and control. So when you have women on space, it's just easier to not care.
Thank you, Sertaç Hocam. We do not have any question in the chat, but if someone wants to ask something by unmuting themselves, it's okay too.
I can ask a quick question. Thank you so much for a fascinating talk, Sertaç. And my question is really hypothetical and probably useless, but I'm still curious. Other than the pandemic, what would have changed if you were to conduct the same research today? What would you expect? How have those spaces changed? What has happened to those people? Did you get to follow any of them?
That's a great question, because I couldn't actually explain much about how I did two different fieldwork. So my first fieldwork was in 2008, and my second fieldwork was in late 2011, and then throughout 2012 almost, right, till August, like half of it. So I will start with the changes that took place from there. So in 2008, what was happening in Istanbul was these kind of, remember those outdoor gyms I showed you, the kind of where we first became familiar with the sporty aunties? They were first being installed in 2008. Okay, before that, like in the very year I was conducting research, so many parks didn't have those outdoor gyms, but women were still like circling those parks, right? And that gave an idea to the municipal governments. Oh, we should take advantage of this because no kids seem to be using those parks anymore. So playground doesn't work. Let's go for this. And then it turned into a new neoliberal project. And even during the years and in between, so many things happen. Women's visibility, women's comfort in those outdoor spaces have increased. So one of the things I want to make sure is kind of clear to the audience is just by women going to women on the gyms doesn't mean that they are not changing the norms operating on them, right? They are actually playing with those norms. These women are not necessarily politically active individuals. I use the term ordinary to refer to them very consciously, very scholarly as a term. Okay, and it's very important to understand those ordinary individuals, right? So the women's visibility in the public sphere was increasing women's comfort in the sort of exercise they were doing was also changing. You might have observed this yourself, like you might have seen at least one or two aunties who were doing some sort of exercise that you wouldn't expect to see at all, right? So these sort of changes seem to be taking place, and there are those trends that come and go. When towards the end of my fieldwork, Doctorum tried to introduce Zumba. Not many people liked, and but then it's still popular in upper class areas, I suppose. They started walking much more, and the reason that women like walking over running, I think I said this, but I kind of want to revisit that, was because they didn't want the moving breasts in the public sphere, right? It's kind of going to attract really nasty harassers, and they don't want that. It's easier to walk. But then this kind of fascination seemed to be growing in one direction. Another direction I want to highlight is, as I said, like to me, spor merakı is not just about sport, right? It's it's almost like a tool women use to discover and cultivate their desiring selves. So one of the things we can understand about its operations over the long term is how women themselves are changing, how women themselves and the way they articulate their desires are changing. One of the things I was like really afraid to receive as a question, maybe 10 years after my book is out, is to receive a response that goes, oh, you say women do not enunciate, do not articulate their desires, but they do. But that's the change I'm talking about, actually, right? Like, so this is the kind of direction. Sadly so, this self-making process is also hitting some nerves of the toxic masculinity, right? And in the lives of the women I had the blessing of interviewing with, getting into the lives of women, they are they're also in huge struggles with it. I have to say, some of the success stories that I have saved and sometimes updated, some of them I updated in my book, involve divorce, and that's a liberation story for them, right? So yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think Jale is coming. I feel like she's gonna unmute herself. If she wasn't gonna.
I don't know, but I can give you a fun fact. Jale's husband actually made a fortune from the outdoor gyms as a physical therapist, because they're actually quite dangerous. So that's another fact about those spaces of exercise.
Speaking of physical therapy, actually, my father was a physical therapist, but before that, he was a national athlete. So I grew up with the sports people. So when I had this question of why the entire literature about women in the Middle East is dominated by really horrific, sad stories, like why, if we attempt to get to know not just women, overall gender in the Middle East through the existing social science literature, we would assume it's really, really horrific. So what can I look at closely that's different than that? So sports was an easy choice for me. That also helped me in the 2012, when I was wrapping up my fieldwork. That was also when London Olympics was taking place. And I went back to London to follow and update my blog. Alon was probably following. And then that my blog was, it's no longer active, Muslim Women in Sports blog. And then I was brazen enough to send an email to Turkish consulate to say, if you're going to have an event where you will invite Olympians, Turkish female Olympians, I should come. And I ended up getting myself invited, even meeting one of my father's old pals from who was also an athlete, marathon runner like my father was. So it's kind of like a kind of good how can I say, it was a good starting point, an easy starting point for me to expand this kind of literature narrowness. I'm not trying to say the literature itself is very narrow. It's just, you know, we needed another color, and that for me, that color was sports. It was just under my nose, really. Okay, that's a long silence.
I think we do not have any other question. So Gamze, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yes, thank you, Şeyda. Thank you, Sertaç Hocam, for this magnificent and joyful talk.
May I ask a question? Is it end?
Yes, but
Okay.
Şeyda is the boss, I think.
Müge, if you want.
Okay, thank you. I'm too shy to enter. Sorry for being late. I missed most of the speech. Thank you. The name of the speech was also interesting for me. Also, I'm invited by Alon. It's nice to hear you mention him. And I'm mostly expressing myself over cycling, and I'm an urban planner, and I mostly also think about urban design and participatory approaches in the city, municipal issues, and these all things make me think about mostly governance of the city and sports as well. And few months ago, we have held a workshop on adult education workshop. It's about ISMEX. Probably you know about it.
I did go to ISMEX, actually. One of my instructors was a trainer there, and almost all the photos I showed was from one of the ISMEX.
I missed all. Sorry, I was late. And it was interesting that the manager of the ISMEC, she told me about most of the ISMEC gyms are used by women who applied ISMEC as a participant. For example, they are going to ISMEC to learn another thing. They're telling their families they're going to ISMEC for example, for learning how to tail.
Exactly. Yes. Go ahead.
And they attend to sports classes, and they don't say to their families, for example.
Exactly. That's the agency I'm talking about. Being able to lie.
Yeah, it is something to think on, really. It's also same for cycling as well. Most of the women are not telling their families they're cycling in the city. Gym, at least a little semi-public area, and it is limited interaction with others. But in public spaces in Istanbul, also we have open outdoor sports facilities, you know, in parks, parks. Have you ever think about that open public outdoor sports? You know, there are some nodes in
outdoor gyms. Yeah, outdoor gyms. Yeah, I did conduct research there as well. But what part of it are you asking, really?
Yeah, indeed. If there is any difference in the use of that spaces by women, because most of the time they are very open and how you say shared places, and it is very visible, and you have chance to expose yourself with your daily clothes, and you can make sports, or you can use your other clothes to make sports. I think it's also make a good difference to go to gyms. You need to see the with gym clothes, and in open public outdoor sports facilities, you can also be daily clothes. I think clothing was also another point of using that facilities. I would like to know about, is there any insight from women if they feel yourself to wear correct clothes in because for cycling it's same. They don't want to wear sports clothes and they want to?
Well, sports clothes are very expensive. I'll first start with the agency, actually. That's really important because one of the things, I mean, it's, I don't think we should underestimate the importance of women's ability to fool the mechanisms that are trying to control them. When I was first doing my presentation about agency and desire, like one of the questions was reflecting how it was like, I think that particular person in the audience couldn't process that, you know, fooling these systems can be agentive. Agency is not about moving somewhere. Right? Agency is about being able to create a change in the larger operations. It's about systemic change, right? Otherwise, just being a human being would be agentive. That's not the agency we're talking about. What we are talking about is how women are able to kind of change those operations on them in the long term. They do this so softly. It's kind of, you know how in Sufi stories, there's kind of one way of opening a path is by breaking it. Another is like the touch of the water, right? So it's slightly like this. And in my case, in the book, I was giving examples about the same woman, right, saying different, like sharing different excuses with different people so that they can get into the gym. I have a back problem. My doctor has prescribed it to me. I'm trying to be beautiful for you, honey. It's kind of, there are different things for different people, right? And some of them, the ones who are over their 50s, are being mocked by their own kids. They're okay with it, right? There are different ways of dealing with these control mechanisms, and they don't see this as a control mechanism, but they know that this is what they want to do, and it is part of the process, and it is important. So that's the point about agency. The difference between indoor and outdoor is actually important because it's partly connected to the former point I was saying about controlling the bodies. I want to share actually one of the images again, if I can. Wait, go here. Can I just quickly share this screen again one more time? So I want you to, I know you said you missed it, but I want you to take a look at sound again. So this is outdoor gyms. Can you, like, if you look at the women, it's mostly women, men are separate, right? If they are just two of them. And I want you to look at these women, right? They're kind of fully clothed. They are looking down in front of themselves in order not to be inviting, right? When they are using the outdoor gyms. And when women are walking, also look at this guy, he's with his family member. So when women take over these public spaces, right? They first take over those public spaces. Two, they still want to have some sort of control over their bodies if there is a presence of another guy that might cause some trouble to them. Men can cause trouble in all sorts of ways over women's lives. Like a man can get fixated on one particular woman and he might put her into trouble, right? So they need to make sure they're not inviting, right? So the kind of like taking over a space, by taking over space, I mean being the majority, like heavy majority, dominant majority as women in that space. And to the extent of if a man needs to exercise in the same park, this is in Cumhuriyet Park around Gazi Osman Pasha area, then he needs to have a female company, right? Otherwise it's perversive and everybody would know, and there would still be perverse and everybody would know. And there was one single guy, he lost his wife long time ago, so he had to be there on his own, but he was walking against the stream of walk. Everybody was walking like clockwise and he was counterclockwise so that everybody would see his eyes that are not staring at the women's bodies, right? So there is this element, there's this element of how the operations of norms are negotiated differently in the outdoor space. Another thing about clothing, yes, but it's kind of also, you need to understand, like some of the women are going to public parks because some of them prefer, yes, but some of them is because they can't afford the municipally owned gyms either, right? And by not, being able to afford it, I don't mean just membership fees. The membership fees can be so cheap, very inexpensive. During 2011, it was like 10 liras for a 3 months membership, right? But it was heavily regulated. So you would be assigned to 2 classes, so you can't go every time, which is very difficult to manage a large number of women, obviously. And if you miss 2 consecutive classes, you would be dismissed and you wouldn't be allowed to log in again for several months. So it's heavily regulated because it's free. Another thing, and then women in those free sessions in women-only gyms are not really wearing anything other than, sweatpants and t-shirts. They're not necessarily being dressed. Some of them were, but very few. Like it's more for middle to upper class gyms, really. But most important thing was, it doesn't matter what you wear. It has to be like kind of comfortable, yes. But the most important thing was, it was compulsory to wear sneakers, sports shoes in the gyms, in all the municipally owned gyms. And that is expensive. Right. I had this one woman who was borrowing the shoes of another friend of hers whose class was after or before hers or something like that. She couldn't afford it, and she couldn't afford the one that were being sold in the street markets, in pazars, right? So there is an element of affordability that we need to understand when we look at women's clothes, right? Yeah. And I think Gamze was asking a question as well. Were you?
No, Hocam, I was going to make an announcement, but I'm so happy that I did not interrupt this question. Thank
That's
you
a
so
good
much.
question. Thank you, Miguel.
Do we have any other question? Any shy audience? Maybe this is your last chance. Okay, then Gamze, please, floor is yours.
Okay, again, thank you, Hocam. I would like to inform you about our next webinar. Next week, Dr. Jeremy Walton will give a lecture titled Monument Miniature Souvenir on the Material Temporalities of Hagia Sophia. It will be next week on May 27, Thursday at 8 p.m. again. And we would be happy to see you all there also. I have left the events link at the chat box. You can see there. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, everyone. I'm really honored today.
Thank you so much.
And especially, this was a very fun and relatable topic. So I'm so glad that I became the moderator today. So I would like to thank you, Dr. Sehlikoğlu, for discussing this outstanding book. And thank you for all participants for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks again, everyone.
All right. Bye.
Goodbye.